This is Professor Rod Evans, and this is a lecture on the third chapter of this book. And this is Business Ethics, William H. Shaw, 8th edition. This lecture is on the nature of justice. And the way this course is set up, this will be of course, as I said, it's a third chapter, but it's also a chapter on which you'll be tested for the first exam, because the first exam covers the material in chapters 1 through 3. And then the next lecture for this course, Philosophy 303 for Old Dominion University, will be a test review. That is to say, it'll be a review for the first test. In this course, there are 2 tests. There's the first test, and then near the end of the course, or I should say at the end of the course, there's the final exam and the reviews for each. But in any event, let's talk about the nature of justice. The concept of justice has concerned philosophers, including Western philosophers, for a very long time, at least since Plato, though the ancient Israelites had prophets emphasizing justice, and that regarded as a law or a standard against which customs and traditions were to be measured. In other words, the idea, according to many of the ancient prophets within the Hebrew scriptures, the idea was that you could have people engaging in some popular tradition or custom and still doing something that was wrong. So the idea of justice would concern the idea of what was ideal rather than what was fully actual. It was something toward which people were to be moving. In any event, the concept of justice is actually complex. It is different aspects, and it's intertwined with such concepts as fairness, equality, desert, that which is deserved, and rights. So again, we can say justice is related to fairness, equality, desert. Again, I know you could say desert, but it's also desert, as in that which is deserved, and rights. Now, in any event, the concept of justice, as I say, it's complex, it's multi-layered, and it has many aspects. Well, let's look at justice in relation to fairness. Let's say people are given speeding tickets, at least partly because of their ethnicity. If that's true, they're treated comparatively unjustly, though in a non-comparative sense they may deserve the speeding tickets if they were speeding, and if that particular law isn't itself inherently unjust. At a minimum, justice requires that we treat like cases alike. Although treating like cases alike may be a necessary condition for justice, it isn't sufficient, because inherently unjust laws could be consistently applied. You could have a law, let's say, against interracial marriage that could be consistently applied to all ethnicities, and yet it could still be unjust. Justice can also relate to equality. For example, the U.S. Constitution requires equality under the law. Justice can also relate to what is deserved or desert. When a guilty person is set free without punishment, an injustice can be committed, or when an innocent person is convicted of a crime, an injustice can be committed. Now, justice can also relate to rights. The 19th century philosopher J.S. Mill, in fact, tied the idea of justice to rights. In his thinking, people are treated unjustly when their rights are violated. Now, there are what are called rival principles of distributive justice. First of all, we could say that justice then is a subclass of morality, and it involves appeals to overlapping concepts, as we said, of fairness, equality, desert, and rights. Okay? Now, distributive justice has to do with the benefits and burdens that can be distributed. Okay, benefits could be all sorts of things: educational grants, welfare, Social Security benefits, and of course we could also talk about various duties or obligations, and those could include taxes. And historically, we've also had military conscription or the draft. In any event, there are rival principles of distributive justice. What are some of these principles? Well, how about this? To each an equal share. You can call that egalitarianism. And there'll be contexts in which that would be uncontroversial, as when we equally split a pizza for people who have equally contributed to it and who are equally hungry. To each an equal share. To each according to need. Think of governmental educational grants. To each according to individual effort. Okay? To each according to social contribution. To each according to merit. Now, think about, for example, various scholarships that could be given on the basis of people's grades and or their achieving a certain score on a standardized test. So each principle has its advocates and seems appropriate in certain circumstances. If parents can afford to buy both of their kids' bikes, that seems just. Though a society that paid people equally regardless of contribution could be one that would promote laziness, inefficiency, and resentment. I want to talk a little bit about the utilitarian view in relation to justice. Utilitarians want social arrangements that maximize their general happiness, okay? And that's really what they're concerned with. Then you could say that they really don't have an independent moral standard of justice that would be independent of all concerns of maximizing happiness or utility. Again, they want to maximize beneficial consequences. Utilitarian J.S. Mill argued that people can in fact disagree over justice to the extent that the concept is defined without reference to maximizing good consequences. Well, let's talk a little bit about utilitarianism and economic distribution. What sort of economic system will utilitarians advocate? Well, that's going to depend on the consequences of the different possible economic arrangements in different societies. In the early 19th century, most utilitarians tended to favor free trade and limited governmental intervention in the economy. Today, it's probably true that most utilitarians favor some sort of welfare state to the extent that a society can afford it, and they may also be in favor of fairly free markets for reasons of productivity and for increasing innovation and the standard of living. Critics of utilitarianism will often assert that determining, predicting, and measuring the general happiness will be an inexact science at best. Let me paraphrase John Stuart Mill's response to the assertion that utilitarianism relies on vague criteria. Mill, again, the 19th century utilitarian, asserted that principles of justice are often vague and they'll even sometimes conflict. Mill said that people can appeal to justice to defend paying talented workers more than less talented workers because talented workers produce more. Yet, another person may appeal to justice to say that people who do their best should not receive less because they have lesser natural abilities than some other people. What's more, it may be thought that people with superior abilities are already in superior positions without our paying them more. Mill held that whatever our beliefs about justice are, and whenever they conflict, we can help resolve the conflict by trying to follow the course of action that is most likely to maximize good consequences. As our author Shaw points out, although many 19th century utilitarians favored free trade and very little governmental intervention, including regulation, most present-day libertarians probably favor more governmental regulation and safety nets in the form, for example, of a welfare state, at least to the extent that a society could afford it or can afford it. As Shaw points out, many utilitarians have favored more cooperation between owners and workers and more profit sharing between owners and workers. Many utilitarians today want to reduce but not necessarily eliminate differences in income and wealth. Why? Because, for one thing, differences in income and wealth could motivate the most creative and innovative people to innovate and to be more productive. But then you go, well, why would utilitarians want, though, to reduce to some extent differences in income and wealth? Well, that relates to what is sometimes referred to the marginal utility of money. Now, let me just try to illustrate this, because there's a declining marginal utility of lots of things that are good apart from money. Well, let me talk about pizza. Almost everybody, but not everybody likes pizza, but it seems as if almost everybody does. But think about it this way. If you're hungry, the first piece of pizza, the first slice of pizza, may be the most satisfying, right? But let's suppose that you keep on stuffing yourself, and then you can barely eat any more. That last slice of pizza will probably not be as satisfying as the first slice, right? So there's a declining marginal utility of pizza, not just money. In other words, the more you get of some goods, the less satisfying those goods are. So another way of saying this is, if you gave $1,000 to some homeless person, that is going to be more satisfying to that homeless person than if you gave it to someone who's wealthy. Okay, so, and that's one of the reasons, one of the main reasons, many utilitarians will favor at least some redistribution of income. I want to talk now about libertarianism, at least as discussed by Robert Nozick. Robert Nozick was an eminent philosopher in the 20th century. He was very creative, very innovative, very prolific. And interestingly, he was at Harvard for many years, teaching at Harvard. And he was different from most other philosophers because he wasn't the kind of guy who would just enormously specialize in one aspect of philosophy and then refine that. He would often say some very interesting, provocative, and maybe innovative things in one area of philosophy, create quite a stir, and then, of course, there's my cat, and then he would go on to another area. And this is what happened with political philosophy. He wrote a work called Anarchy, State, and Utopia, in which he defended a form of utilitarianism. But anyway, so let's talk about Nozick's view of libertarianism and his theory of justice. In general, though, we can say that libertarians take personal liberty as the highest good, and they want to allow each adult as much freedom as possible to make his or her own choices, provided that those choices don't violate others' rights to life, liberty, or property. Well, and now let's talk specifically about Robert Nozick. By the way, Anarchy, State, and Utopia was published in 1974. Robert Nozick begins with the premise that people have Lockean, that's, we're talking about John Locke, so it's capital L-O-C-K-E-A-N, rights. And John Locke was an eminent philosopher who was very influential, especially in his political philosophy, which influenced our founding fathers, not least Thomas Jefferson, who thought that John Locke was one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived. But anyway, so John Locke believed in natural rights, and natural rights that were negative, including especially a right to others' non-intervention, which is to say a right to be left alone in one's peaceful pursuits, provided that people were not violating other people's rights to life, liberty, or property. Now, Nozick asserted, again, Nozick was influenced to some degree by Locke's philosophy. Nozick asserted that people are entitled to their holdings, that is, things such as goods, money, and property, provided that they have acquired them without fraud or violence. If you earned your income or wealth in a free exchange, or if you were given wealth by someone who earned it without force or fraud, then according to Nozick, you're entitled to it. Okay, so if you take that position very strictly, it's calling for free markets. It's allowing people to inherit money that they themselves didn't earn. But what it's saying is that to determine whether someone's entitled to his or her holdings, you have to look historically. That is to say, you have to look at how the person got whatever he or she has. And what it doesn't say is that you should determine what people get in relation to the entire economy, and it doesn't say that. Now, essentially, Nozick asserts that people, again, are entitled to their holdings so long as they've acquired them justly. That is, again, without fraud or violence or the threat of violence. His position is that if someone has acquired great income and wealth without, again, engaging in force or fraud, that person is entitled to those holdings, and other people can't legitimately seize those holdings because of claims of need. His position is quite compatible with private charity, but it isn't compatible with the forced redistribution of income in any direction. And sometimes the direction goes up, as when corporations get subsidies. According to Nozick, the distribution of goods in a society is just when people are entitled to the holdings they possess. As said earlier, Nozick argues that consistent respect for personal liberty should lead people to reject or repudiate theories of economic justice that require forced distribution of income. Nozick argues that respect for liberty should lead people to, again, reject non-libertarian conceptions of economic justice in favor of his libertarian theory, which he calls his entitlement theory. Now, Nozick asks readers to imagine distributing things such as income according to their favorite non-entitlement theory. He calls this distribution D subscript 1. Okay, what does that look like? Well, that looks like, oops, that. So think of D subscript 1 as it's going to represent someone's favorite non-utilitarian theory. Well, to make it simple, let's just talk about egalitarianism. And even though this would be very difficult to do, let's suppose that it would be possible to give people at the beginning of some fiscal year the same income, let's say. Okay, so let's call that the egalitarian distribution, D subscript 1. Now, he says, let's imagine that some highly marketable person, and he gives the example of one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived, the first 7-footer in the NBA, Wilt Chamberlain. And Wilt Chamberlain was the kind of guy who could score 100 points in one game, right? So you have Wilt Chamberlain, and let's suppose he signs a contract with a team that guarantees him $5 from the price of each ticket. So, okay, let's suppose that happens. So whenever people buy a ticket to a game, including Wilt Chamberlain, that in fact they drop money into a special box with his name on it. Okay. Now, Wilt Chamberlain could end up being one of the highest income earners in society as a result of people's individual preferences. Nozick says, suppose for the sake of argument that a theorist of justice defines justice, again, in egalitarian terms, implying that everyone should start off the fiscal year with equal income. Nozick says, if we define the original just position as equal income, we could theoretically begin there, but we won't stay there if we have a dynamic economic system with economic freedom. Even if we began with equal income, through people's free choices, there would be shifts to unequal distributions. Wilt Chamberlain and presumably highly popular actors and other highly popular athletes and highly popular novelists could end up with more income than most other people. So again, if you start out with D subscript 1, and we can just for the sake of equality, of simplicity, say it's equality, you're going to end up with something different. So in short, Nozick says that whatever your favorite non-libertarian definition of distributive justice is, and whatever distributive principle you want, the fact of the matter is that whatever you start out with, you're not going to end up with. Even if you start out with equality, you're not going to end up with equality to the extent that you have economic freedom, right? Some people are much more marketable than others. Some people are much better at investing than others and saving than others. Some people are more highly disciplined in the marketplace. Well, in any event, so what he says is, to the degree that you really respect freedom, you're going to end up with differences in income and wealth. And that's the nature of things. And so he says, ultimately, if you want to guarantee some set structural distribution, if you such as equality, then you're going to have to forbid capitalist acts between and among consenting adults. So what he says is that freedom itself will imply that we're going to have differences in wealth and income, and especially when you have a highly dynamic economy with huge differences among people in their values, in their personal abilities. You're going to have just very, very large differences. I mean, again, depending on how heterogeneous your population is and how dynamic your economy is. So again, he says if you really do value freedom, then you have to allow for certainly some differences in wealth and income in a dynamic economy with heterogeneous agents. Now, what I want to do is talk about another philosopher who became more popular than Nozick, and who was also at Harvard teaching philosophy. This is John Rawls. That's R-A-W-L-S, who lived from 1921 to 2002. By the way, Nozick died pretty close to that time as well, and both are at Harvard. Both were very popular. But the difference is that Rawls spent a large part of the latter part of his life creating and defending his political philosophy, and whereas Nozick really didn't do that. Because as I told you, Nozick would say something really interesting, write something interesting in one area of philosophy, then move on to another. But in any event, Nozick was a very highly influential political philosopher. He's possibly the most influential philosopher in English since World War II. Nozick has a book called A Theory of Justice, which is like over 600 pages. It's presented as an alternative to utilitarianism, which he thought could lead to the mistreatment of individuals and minorities. Rawls believed that his work, A Theory of Justice, emphasizes fairness and the moral equality of persons. His theory differs from that of Nozick, which we've seen emphasizes individual freedom and individual responsibility and individual natural rights, including a right to property. Rawls viewed society as collectively producing products and benefits, and believed that we should come up with rules and institutions that are generally beneficial, but are especially beneficial to the least advantaged members of society. Rawls's approach to social and political philosophy is contractarian, based on a hypothetical contract, which, by the way, that sort of idea of a hypothetical contract was very common. You know, if you just go throughout history, contractarian views of political philosophy and political obligations have been around for hundreds of years, whether you're talking about Hobbes or Rousseau and others. So it's certainly the idea of a contractarian political philosophy and John Locke is certainly wasn't original with Rawls, and of course Rawls never claimed that it was, but he did kind of tweak it and have some of his own original ideas. His strategy is to ask what principles and institutions we choose if we were to meet for that purpose, for the purpose of creating a just society, and what he calls the original position. his contract theory, or contractarian theory, again, is in line historically, at least with the tradition of Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau, all of whom had contractarian thought. Now, who are the people who are in the original position? Well, they're rationally self-interested people who seek their long-term happiness and who are capable of using reason to advance their long-term interests. What do the original contractors in the original position know about themselves? Precious little, but that's by design. All they know is that they're rationally self-interested, and all they know is that they are going to seek their long-term happiness. They don't know what sex they are, their particular abilities, or their ethnicity, or their religion, or their social and economic status, or, in fact, they don't know anything about their particular skill set. And so, Rawls introduces the concept of the veil of ignorance. If people choose principles and institutions while being influenced by morally irrelevant factors, such as sex, ethnicity, religion, income, personal property, and particular skill sets, they will very likely endorse biased rules and institutions. You can well imagine, because we have historical examples, of white Protestant males with property, thinking that only white males with property should have power, political power, in society, and they should be allowed to vote and hold office, but that whole groups of other people should not be allowed to vote and hold office. Rawls contends that a just society will contain laws and institutions agreeable to rationally self-interested agents whose prejudices have been minimized. Again, to minimize bias, the original contractors must ignore such individual attributes as their sex, ethnicity, religious affiliation, income, wealth, and individual skill sets. The idea is that under Rawls's conditions, no individual is likely to argue that some particular group, such as white propertied men, or star athletes, or philosophers, should receive special social and economic privileges because for all anyone knows in the original position, he or she could be male or female, of any ethnicity, of any religion, and possibly unathletic and unphilosophical. So Rawls also introduces the maximin rule, or you could call it the mini-max ruler strategy. But, and you can think about game theory, to minimize bias and protect individuals from arbitrary power, Rawls expects the original contractors to follow what game theorists call the maximin rule for making decisions. That rule is a strategy of practical rationality. If you're rationally self-interested and you're making decisions without fully knowing all the consequences, you'll try to minimize the worst that could happen to you to the degree that you're able. Now, the maximin rule will give the original contractors reason to reject certain institutions as unacceptable, and presumably people would say these are inherently unjust. For example, if you don't know whether you'll be a peasant or a member of the aristocracy, a slave or a slave holder, a Hindu untouchable, or a member of the priestly caste, a Brahmin, you'd be better off rejecting the institutions of slavery, hereditary aristocracy, and religious caste systems than accepting them and taking your chances. So often, if you have hereditary aristocracy, they're going to be in the minority, and the majority of people are not going to be aristocrats. And it's quite possible to have a society in which you could have a minority of slave holders and majority slaves. Now, let's talk about choosing Rawls's principles. Although people in the original position will be ignorant of their individual circumstances, they will seek certain goods that will be valuable whatever their particular goals, interests, and talents turn out to be. These goods Rawls calls primary goods, and they'll include not only income and wealth, but also rights, liberties, opportunities, and self-respect. So you might think, well, how about a monk? Well, how about there are certain religious people who don't care whether they earn much money, but guess what? They may want to have donations so that they can help poor people. Think of Mother Teresa, for example. Now, Rawls thinks that rationally self-interested people would want to take, say, a 10% chance of being a member of nobility if they have a 90% chance of being a serf with almost no upward mobility. Rawls also said that because people in the original position will be aiming at maximizing their own individual chances for happiness, they won't endorse utilitarianism, which could require individuals to sacrifice their happiness to enhance the general happiness. The idea is that because the principles will be agreed to in an initial situation of equality and fairness, they will be principles of justice. As people in the original position are given more data about their specific society, they can design their basic social and political institutions in more detail. Now, I'm not going to require you to know the two basic principles that Rawls thinks that the original contractors will arrive at. I'm not going to require that. They're all over the internet. They're in your book. But here we go. This is what it says. This is the first, is the kind of principle of liberty. It's pretty libertarian. Each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. That's Rawls's first principle. The second one is more complex. The difference principle includes, well, let's look at this, right? Don't worry about memorizing social and economic inequalities or to satisfy two conditions. First, they are to be attached to positions and offices open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. And second, they are to be to the greatest expected benefit of the least advantaged members of society. Okay. Now, according to Rawls, the first principle takes priority over the second, at least for societies that have attained a moderate level of affluence. What liberties does Rawls have in mind? Freedom of thought, conscience, religious affiliation, and personal and political liberties. For example, Rawls would say that a law prohibiting all citizens from criticizing a leader wouldn't maximize liberty, but say allowing everyone to make a right turn on a red light would enhance everyone's liberty. The second principle concerns social and economic inequalities. Regarding inequalities, Rawls writes, it's best to understand not any differences between offices and positions, but differences in the benefits and burdens attached to them directly or indirectly, such as prestige and wealth or liability to taxation and compulsory services. Here's what Rawls says. He says, players in a game do not protest against there being different positions, such as batter, pitcher, catcher, and the like, nor to there being the different offices of government, such as president, senator, governor, judge, and so on, each with special rights and duties. Rawls is saying that social and economic inequalities can be permissible, but only under certain conditions. Okay? So you want equality under the law. You want the possibility of upward mobility. You want to look out for those who are the least advantaged. And because he says any of us could have been born into the least advantage, or we could end up having some life-altering accident, let's say, or we could get a disease that could enormously decrease our ability to fend for ourselves. So Rawls says we need to be concerned with differences in wealth and income. Now, I want you to understand, Rawls does allow, then, for differences in wealth and income, but again, only under certain conditions, and one of those conditions is that we try to maximize the welfare of the least advantaged. Now, Rawls is saying that there must be meaningful equality of opportunity if there are inequalities. The other part of the second principle is less familiar and more controversial. It's called the difference principle. Inequalities are justified only if they work to the benefit of the least advantaged. Now, people may think that the original contractors in the original position would choose equality not only in the case of liberty and law, but also in the case of social and economic goods. But Rawls believes that paying the most inventive and productive people more than other people can lead to inequality, but could conceivably enrich everyone's life, including those who are less productive. Right? Now, sometimes, also think about this. Think of the woman who created Harry Potter. You could say, well, isn't it the case that when you have millions of people buying the books and going to the movies, that they are contributing to economic inequality? Well, in a sense, yes. But guess what? The people, when they do that, are doing so quite voluntarily and believe they're better off buying the Harry Potter books and going to the movies. So people would say it's a win-win situation. She ends up with having much more than she started out with, but other people, through free exchange, believe they're better off having consumed Harry Potter books and having watched the movies, let's say. By the way, imagine two pies, one small with equal slices and the other huge with unequal slices, but with the smallest slice being larger than each equal slice of the smaller pie, right? So you can tell that I'm not an artist, by the way. But the point is, sometimes people will leave a society where there's more equality, at least when it comes, let's say, to income and wealth, and go to society where there's less equality, more inequality. But they'll do that because they believe there's more opportunity and there's a higher standard of living. Think about people moving from Cuba to the United States or the former Soviet Union to the U.S., right? Typically, things go more in that direction, the other direction. I mean, people normally go from where there's they want less freedom and less opportunity to where there's more freedom and more responsibility. So at least you look at the way in which people move from one country to another. But anyway, Rawls doesn't include as fundamental the right to own certain kinds of property, such as businesses or factories, or a natural right to contract as understood by the doctrine of laissez-faire. Now, critics, I'm not going to go over a lot of what critics have said about Rawls. I want you to, it's good for you to know that there have been critics of Rawls. Yet Rawls, again, has been one of the most influential English-speaking philosophers since World War II. Well, some critics say that although we may not deserve our height, our native intelligence, or our beauty, our choices and our attitudes largely determine what we do with our natural endowments. Many tall people don't develop skills at basketball. Many attractive people don't develop social or acting skills. Many intelligent people don't develop their minds. Even in the same family, some children become police officers and others become criminals. Rawls critics say that Rawls seems to go beyond arguing that people don't deserve their height or other natural endowments. He seems to suggest that personal characteristics that normally receive moral praise and that are key to economic growth and innovation, such as diligence, persistence, and a sense of personal responsibility, reflect and perhaps even are determined by, maybe fully determined by, one's genetic heritage and the environment in which people are reared. Critics of Rawls say that regardless of how much control you think people have over their attributes, values make a huge difference in a society's economic productivity, and in personal achievements. We can choose to admire and reward the most creative and productive people, in which case we'll probably produce more of them and we'll have a more innovative society, or we can choose not to admire or reward them. Certain societies are much more likely to produce a Steve Jobs than other societies. Our general society esteems people like Steve Jobs more than, let's say, Amish communities. However, the Amish communities certainly have their virtues, and including solidarity. The unprecedented economic growth after the rise of the Industrial Revolution was a product of several forces, including the scientific revolution, increasing emphasis on material comfort and achievement, increasing belief in progress, and increasing esteem for commerce and innovation. Cultures can esteem in varying degrees the values and institutions that led to scientific and material progress. I want to talk a little bit about achievement and free will. We don't say of our pet cats, why don't they stop sleeping 16 hours a day and make something of themselves? But we do say this of people. The expression make something of oneself suggests that people are agents and not simply and purely patients, doers and not simply objects, choosers and not wholly robots, though I think there can be degrees of free will. You can see that, by the way. I mean, a baby's not going to have the same level of choice as a child several years older, and a child normally won't have the same ability to choose and to think about consequences as an ordinary adult. And someone who has Alzheimer's, advanced states of Alzheimer's, will not have the level of free will that an ordinary adult would have. But how about this? There were two sons of an alcoholic father who were asked about their drinking habits. One son was also an alcoholic and was asked why he was an alcoholic, to which he responded, because my father was an alcoholic. The other son, who was not an alcoholic, was asked the same question, to which he responded, because my father was an alcoholic. Years ago, I taught a Saturday class. One of my students was a woman who came from Richmond. So she came from Richmond, went from Richmond to Norfolk. So I don't know, she probably had to travel about an hour and a half or so. But she was never late. Yet I had some students who lived near the campus who would be habitually late. So lateness is often not purely a function of distance, but can also be a function of planning and choice. Anyway, let's get back to Rawls. Some people think that Rawls was minimizing the role of values and free will and personal responsibility. But again, there are other people who will disagree with that, but I just wanted to give you at least some perspective. And there are other really complex philosophical questions, by the way, about Rawls, and about whether, if you peel away all the things that Rawls regards as contingent when it comes to individual persons, whether you end up with the same person. I mean, can you really think of Mike Tyson without thinking of his relation to boxing? Can you really do that? I mean, can you think of someone like Robin Williams without his connection to acting and comedy? I mean, some people think that what people do, especially when it expresses their deepest values, is so connected to them that you can't really remove their identity from what they do. But I'm not going to go into that right now. But what I do want to is to get back to Rawls. So then, according to Rawls, social and economic inequalities require justification. And only certain justification will work, judged by what would be acceptable to the original contractors operating and choosing under a veil of ignorance. Further, the second principle holds that insofar as social and economic inequalities are acceptable, they must work to benefit those who are the least well off. Let's talk, I'll talk just a little bit more about first the second principle. To the extent that different jobs or positions produce greater rewards for their occupants. Again, we've seen that for Rawls there must be meaningful equality of opportunity, and that includes there must be some upward mobility that's spread out widely in the culture. As we've seen, the second principle rules out, among other things, caste systems and requires creating avenues for upward socioeconomic mobility. The first principle maximizes our most common civil liberties, but it doesn't include a right to own productive property such as factories and to form laissez-faire business contracts. Rawls, again, doesn't think that the original contractors will be libertarians. But he doesn't think they're going to be pure utilitarians either, because he thinks, again, that some unqualified utilitarianism could end up mistreating individuals or minorities. Now, again, we've talked about the basic liberties in the first principle. Again, freedom of thought, conscience, religion, assembly, and others accepted within what some people call liberal democracies or republics. What we have technically is supposed to be a constitutional republic, and generally that's how it was referred to by our founders, who very often spoke disparagingly of democracies and regarded them as not protecting natural individual rights, and regarded them really as mob rule. I don't want to go deeply into that, but I can just assure you that the word democracy, by the way, doesn't occur in our founding documents, whether in the United States Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence, but it does talk about republics. But I won't go too deeply into that right now. Now again, I just want you to know that Rawls thinks that people would arrive at those two principles, and Rawls thinks that he's giving us the ingredients of what would be a just society. Okay, and again, it's a very creative theory. It's definitely contractarian. It's in certain ways libertarian, but not completely. And while it's concerned with having good consequences, it's not purely utilitarian. In fact, as I've said, Rawls wanted to create a theory that was not unqualifiedly utilitarian, because he thought that could end up being oppressive, especially to minorities and individuals. But he also wanted to create a theory that respected individual rights and looked after the people who were the most vulnerable, and also had a concern for equality as under the law, and had a concern for upward mobility. So for many people, it's become a very attractive theory, and Rawls spent the latter part of his life refining it and defending it. Okay, so basically that's what I wanted to cover as far as Rawls goes, and as far as actually the third chapter. And the first test will be on the first three chapters. And that concludes this lecture.